Hi everyone, it's Cheryl Bruce here. I started to do this painting the other day of a rocky headland with the intention of doing it with the credit card technique, which I've demonstrated before. And I started to video just for some snippets for Instagram, but I thought I may as well keep videoing. The only problem was I didn't speak at the beginning, I was just painting away. So I'm just going to talk you through the start of the process, and then the video sound will kick in when I actually started to speak while I painted. So the first stage of this technique of the rocks is a very wet wash, or a fairly wet wash, and I'm looking for the warm and the cool colours. So I've put down some yellow ochre mixed with Naples yellow in the area where I can see a bit of warm colour on my photo reference. And then I've gone to a Lunar Blue from Daniel Smith for the cooler areas of the rocks. I want there to be a bluish grey tone to my rocks mostly in this painting. A very cool feeling. So the paper's dry, but the paint is wet. And I'm covering the whole section of rocks with this first wash, which is damp. That has a little bit more yellow ochre in it than Naples yellow in that top section. And I work these rocks section by section, otherwise it's too hard to keep it damp. And now you'll see I'm coming in with the top layer. And you must have thick pigment for this, fresh from the tubes. It doesn't work with pan pigment. So I've got Jane's Grey and Sepia as my two dark colours that I'm working with mostly. And I also add some Australian Grey, which I haven't done in a top layer of rocks like this. So it's a little bit experimental for me in this colour palette. And so now you can see I've got the right thickness of pigment. Those first sort of two strokes of the dark colour weren't thick enough. It has to be really juicy pigment. And where you see the tone is a little bit warmer, it's sepia. And the cooler dark grey is Jane's Grey. This little one I'm digging into now is Jane's Grey in that palette. I perhaps pick up a little bit of Van Dyke Brown in the early stage of this as well. In a minute it'll switch to the audio of me talking while I'm painting. That's the Australian Grey again, where you see the light colour, and I didn't clean my brush, and I either picked up sepia or a bit of brown at that stage. Jane's Grey. And I want this lighter, so I'm going to try the Australian Grey again, just down here. So this is too thin through here. It's not going to lift in the same way that I want it to. I'm trying a different colour here called Piemontite Genuine by Daniel Smith. Actually, another colour that would be really nice for this is Lunar Earth, but I don't have time. Maybe I do. I'm just putting out some raw umber, some Van Dyke Brown, and some Lunar Earth, even though I think I'm probably not going to want it as yellowy orange. Just a little touch of this is really interesting, hopefully. But see, this is still too thin, so I need more pigment. So I'm putting more sepia. Oh, this is Jane's Grey now, so I'm switching between sepia and Jane's Grey, so there's variation. I've got some Daniel Smith Sodalite Blue, which is what was my underwash. Okay, and see how I've got all this water down here? I don't really want that. So I'm just manipulating the water off the bottom. My easel is on a slight angle. Let's see what this does. So I've got a half a credit card. And all I want to do actually now is just make texture in what will be the base of my rocks. Often I don't do anything over the top. I aim for this to be the actual shapes and texture that I want. It's hit and miss whether you can paint over the top because you've damaged the surface of the paper. So I'm cleaning the paint and the moisture off the card when you see me take it away. So this one I just tested some colours before. I think this is too wet and that's why it all just pulls. So it's not that I'm waiting for it to dry because then it won't work. I'm adding more pigment. It needs to be thick sitting on the top. But you know, I still quite like what's happening there. That's definitely got a feeling of a rock. It's just much wetter than what I usually would do. Also working sometimes to pull little cracks and crevices through. So I'll do a heavy, really heavy press and then a lift. Again, I'm cleaning the credit card each time you see me take it off camera, wiping it on a towel. So I think about the shape of the rocks. They tend to be three-dimensional, so often you'll see me do a top, like a pull across the top as if that's reflecting light, and then I might go downwards. Normally I wouldn't have, if it's not as wet, I wouldn't have such big puddles of paint being left when I lift the... If I go back over an area a second time like I just did, I've got to be conscious of heavier. And this is kind of, in my photo, quite vertical rock along this section. Usually I try not to go over. That's the second time, like I'm doing now. So see these big clumps of paint? I'm not going to leave those like that. I'm taking a rigger brush and I'm just going to pull some of that paint out. If it's too big a shape like this one here, I might just lift some of it. And I can come back and put a more shadow shape on later. A more shadow colour, sorry, on some of these rather than it being... It's that I don't want that black. The darkness of that. But I love the blue into the brown. You know, if you're painting this, it's a lot more work. And now, so I've got nothing, no colour on my brush, just a little bit of moisture. I'm going to clean it every now and then. And I'm just thinking about cracks and crevices and fissures. And this is what I call the dancing brush. So just literally blur your eyes and pull a little bit of pigment out here and there. So can you see then this gives me that look of just those fine little cracks and details. If I've already got a suggestion of it, I can make that stronger. This is browner and flatter. I might put a blue wash over that later. I did want a change between warm and cool, so that's why I put the more yellows and the Piemontite Genuine colour there. And I'm working on Archer's rough paper, so, you know, this will take a beating. This, you know, really wet, dark bit still bothers me a little bit. And down here, it's not that I want it all light, it's that I just don't want such a big clump of dark. But what I might do, one of my favourite little strategies for breaking up a dark area is to drop in some Holbein lavender. So I've got it quite thickish on my brush, quite dry. It will push the dark aside a little bit, but it sinks into it and looks more natural. And it will look like white in the shade. So I'm just breaking this up just a little bit. You might not feel the need on yours, you might have got your colour really nicely dispersed. I love this dark here, and the reason I'm leaving that is that these areas are where my focus and my centre of interest is, where the water hits the rock. So I'm quite happy for that little dark bit there. It's just these sort of two shapes here that I felt were just too flat and uninteresting. So a little bit of thickish opaque lavender just popped in here and there. And so I'll let that dry before I move on to these next areas. And I'm not going to do the whole lot with the credit card. I might do this technique for some of these back rocks that are a bit more distant, but down here I'll paint those in a more traditional manner. My first stage is dry of the credit card rocks there. I'm going to, maybe I'll just keep going with the credit card this whole section and then paint this part manually. So where I want it to have a bluish tone, I'm going to put down this underwash of Lunar Blue by Daniel Smith. Oh, I wish I'd started there first. It's a big area. I will put some warm as well, so this is going to give me a very cool sort of rocky undertone like I've got here, and I want a little bit of warmth coming in so that there's variation. Because these aren't colours in my normal palette, I just have a separate little palette like this that I work from. I don't like the Daniel Smith once they're dry. I like to use them fresh from the tube. I find they're dry a little bit too hard, and I need too much water to activate them. So this is a runnier underwash, like one of my other demonstrations that goes into more detail about how to do rocks with a credit card. So if you haven't seen that one, I would definitely watch it. You might be able to see I've got a little bit of masking fluid happening along here because my wave is going to be crashing up. I want warm on this rock that's closer to us, and maybe just a little bit of warmth up here. So I'm using a little bit of Naples yellow. Oops, and whatever that was that I just touched into by accident. I have no clue, but let's keep it going down here. It looks like I've mixed maybe a touch of Indian yellow or something. And I want a bit of blue, a bit of cool maybe down near the bottom. I'm conscious I don't want it to be make green though, so I'll just push that up before I put the blue down, just so it's cooler in temperature down near where the wave captures. And I need this to come more forward, so I'll just put some blue as well in this part. That rock is behind this one here. If you were looking at my photo, You can see we've got a section of rock more forward. Lunar Earth is a certain kind of pigment by Daniel Smith, which does a few strange things as it dries. I'm not the most technical about pigments, but I loved using it in my desert paintings. See how it's kind of pushing away and making this really, it's different to granulation. It's got a name, but I just can't think what it is. Somebody told me the other day what it's called, that type of pigment, but I just can't remember. So now this is still damp. You can see it's still shiny, and I think before it was too wet up here, so I'm going to give it another little minute or two. But my pigment's dried because it's a few hours. I went and did a few errands, so I'm just going to put some more pigment out. Okay, so this is where I started putting the pigment down. So ideally that's where I will start with the thicker pigment. I'm going to put down these colours, you know, put them, don't spread them. Put the colour while you've got pigment on your brush that's thick, but don't spread it because the top layer needs to have thick, rich pigment. So I'm interchanging between Sodalite Genuine, oh no, sorry, Jane's Grey from Daniel Smith, Sepia by whatever brand, they're all pretty similar. I've got a bit of something called Piemontite or Piemontite Genuine as well by Daniel Smith. It's a bit redder, like a, can you see there the changing colour? So it's going to be a bit warmer. And I've got to basically cover this up. I used a little bit of Australian grey before up here, which I've never used an opaque light mix in a top layer. So this is a bit of an experiment. You know, worst case it's a piece of paper and it gets ripped up, and I use the back for testing. Now I can't just stop now and do that. I've got to keep going, and I've got to start to work a little bit quicker. So this part at the back I'm just putting nearly all sepia. Maybe I'll put some of the Piemontite Genuine, Piemontite or whatever. Somebody please correct me. And this part I want to be lighter. Remember I said it's closer to us, it's a lighter coloured rock. What I might do out of interest and curiosity is maybe the Lunar Blue and the Sodalite Genuine. Is that fresh? See, this is part of why I'm not the biggest fan of Daniel Smith. I only put that colour out at 12 o'clock and it's now 3:30 and it's dry in the palette. So I need fresh pigment again, where Windsor Newton would still be wet. But see, if I keep spreading, I've got thin paint. I can't do this technique with the credit card with thin paint. I've got to keep layering, picking up more, changing the colour a little bit, because how boring would it be if it was all one colour. Okay, and again, remember I started over here laying the colour on, so that's where I will start picking the colour up. So I've got half a credit card, loyalty card. I like the ones with the curved corners. And I hold it so that it's bent a little bit. I'm using this part of it, not straight the corner. If I use the corner, I'll likely just get lines lifted like this, or I'll even make a dark indentation rather than picking up. So I'll go across and down. And then when I hit the bottom, you can see it pools down here a little bit, so I'll pull it back up. And you find a direction and a movement that feels comfortable for you, but I tend to go across and down or up and across. I don't want a big straight line here because this is where my froth is coming in, so I'll come back and deal with that before it dries. But the reason I like this technique is that you get the sense of rocks quite quickly and effortlessly with this texture that is quite difficult to achieve just painting. I'm being a bit conscious of where I put my hand down, because sometimes you leave oil on your painting and then it will repel. It can repel the paint later, so I tend to try to not put my whole hand down. Oh look, this is really lovely. And see, I've just covered this up now, so I lift. So this is a little bit of an experiment for me today. I haven't done this before with any of these pigments. And I don't think I've done this big an area. Oh, I really like what's happening there. So I'm conscious, like really look before you come back in for that next stroke, so that you don't lose something that just looked beautiful. That works really nicely there. I don't like this dark edge across the top. This rocky headland is in front of that one, so I want to make sure it doesn't have a dark outline. So just lifting. The other thing I did before when I turned the camera off was use my fingernail in a few places. So you don't need very much of a fingernail to be able to just come in and, you know, sharpen up a highlight. Okay, so now remember the step before. I came in with my trusty, messy Kazan Rigger by Neef, which I love for its kind of just random mark making, and you can see again I'm just dancing the brush over. I might see the occasional line that I think, oh, I'll accentuate that with this mark making. But in general, I'm just bouncing it around. I'm picking up the pigment. I didn't have anything on my brush, it was just slightly damp, and I'm just picking up the pigment out of the spots like this that have wet pigment sitting there. I really like this bluey red here, and that's that underwash shining through a little bit. You can see the yellows, the blue tone. This has got a warmer tone to it, and this staining red is obviously the colour called Piemontite. Okay, and so what I would do now is probably let that dry. I'll look at it for a couple of minutes as it's drying though, just to make sure there's nothing that I want to really soften or a change about these dark areas before I so see this dark outline here, I need to get rid of that a little bit, so my fingernail is enough for that. So I want to look at this just as it's starting to dry, make sure I'm not neglecting some area that just could do with a little bit of change. And then I'll let that dry. And once it's dry, if I want to set something back, like this area here, I can glaze just an ultramarine blue over the top of it to push that back and bring this forward. You could glaze a yellow ochre or something if you want to warm up an area, this technique for me was just about trying to create rocks and movement in a quick and easy manner. So I am going to do a bit of the water now and record that. So I've got two mixers ready to go. One is one of my favourites. I can't think and paint. One is one of my favourites, Cobalt Turquoise and Diox Purple. And this mix that I'm starting with up the back here was meant to be a little bit darker, but I've picked up a bit of water. This is Prussian blue with, I can't actually tell what I had put out, whether it was burnt sienna or quinacridone gold, but I don't use much burnt sienna, so I think it's quinacridone gold. And I was just trying to make a greener colour than the Cobalt Turquoise and Diox mix. That gives me a really lovely muted blue, but I feel like back in this distant sea, it's more greeny. So it's good to have paper close by to check your mix. Doesn't bother me if it's not exactly the same, because the ocean is varied in colour. And so I'm not doing this like a big wash, because there's a lot of white, really reflective areas. I've got to make sure I come up against that rock edge with pigment in places so that it looks like it tucks behind. And about this area I want to get a little bit lighter and bluer. So I'll switch over to my Cobalt Turquoise and Diox Purple mix. More heavy on the Cobalt Turquoise than the Diox, because I don't want it to be purpley. And see how they're different. One's green, one's blue. So I'll link them, drop the blue into the green in the couple of strokes just before it. And there's a, oh yeah, I did. I've got a bit of masking fluid just in here, because in my photo there's a bit of a wave coming in. Through here on this diagonal. And so I'm really considering direction with my strokes. Oops, and I realised I really wanted that to be white in here. Now I've got to be really careful. While I've got some masking fluid on there, I haven't masked out the whole area that's white. I knew that I would be just happy to manage that as I paint. I might drop a bit of this blue, maybe even more pure. So you can see mine's still glossy, so I can add paint into areas where it's still shiny, but I can't add paint without being really careful into where it's drier and it's lost the sheen. So I am, intentional in where I put my brush back in. I would not drop my brush in here with wet pigment on the brush, or I'll get a bloom or a cauliflower. And sometimes that's fine, like in the ocean, texture is really a normal part of the sea, but still where I can, I try to control it a little bit. So up in here it gets a bit grey, sort of mauvey looking, which is probably because it's reflecting. We're either seeing down through the waves to the rock below where it goes under the water, or it's reflecting a little bit. So again, I changed colour from blue to grey, so where they are close together I'll tend to drop a little bit of one into the other, so a little bit of blue into the grey, or a little bit of grey into the blue. Now there's a lot of white froth here. I want to be really thoughtful, I guess, at this stage of how much colour I add, because I actually want to maintain a lot of the white of the paper and not actually paint too much. So can you see my colour's gotten more muted? It's better here than what it is here. So I might actually, I don't like to pat, but I feel like if I just pat that, lift the damp pigment off. This is a focal point, so I'm quite happy to have really light against dark here. I've got the white froth, though this actually on this side has just a slight tint of colour, so maybe even a touch mauve. And I'm just splaying my brush a little bit. White froth often isn't actually white. It's kind of bluey and it's mauve. It's shadowed. So I am looking for colour variation. I can see it's a little bit sort of greener, more aquary turquoise. What I want maybe is a bit of turquoise light, cobalt turquoise light, perhaps down in here. And if I show you my photo again, so I'm working over in this area now, and you can see there's just not much. There's greys, mauves, pale cobalt, and I want to give the suggestion in places like this. To me at the moment just feels like there must be a rock under the water because of these couple of strokes. That's just random, so I'm going to build on that by putting a few a couple of extra vertical lines, and then what I can do is just drop a few dark marks through there that might make it look like there's a touch of a rock hidden. There's a bit of shadow, and so this at the moment might look a bit like a rainbow. I go from green into blue, blue into grey, some mauve, some cobalt turquoise light, back into some mauve. And so now I'm just picking up a really muted mauve, dropping it in horizontal and diagonal kind of marks. When I'm doing the ocean, I'm really careful not to do mark making that's like this, unless you want to indicate it's a really choppy sea. So you'll notice that my strokes are more horizontal. They're zigzaggy kind of, I think of them as Z's, I often say in class, like the Z of Zorro. And that gives you a diagonal and a horizontal movement, which works really well for the ocean. And like I said, I'm really going to try and not do too much at all in terms of water. To indicate the movement of the waves, we do need some shadow, so I've just cleaned my brush and I'm coming back to soften some parts of that stroke that I just put down. There's going to be a rock that's up against, and because I didn't have an intention to actually record this as such for YouTube as a tutorial, I haven't got it set up that you can see my palette for the colours. But I'll show you in just a second. So I've got a little rock in here. I could just drop that in, very plain. And because this is damp, that just ran really nicely in some places. I'll come back and see in a little bit whether it needs any other detail. And so just in talking about my palette, very messy. I love a dirty palette, so that's why I'll sometimes say, oh, I'm not quite sure what that colour is. This is the colour I'm mixing. Sorry, I'm pointing to it with the corner. I'm mixing this over here with the Prussian blue, which is sitting there, to make that greeny colour. Down here I always have my Cobalt turquoise, and I'm mixing that with Diox purple. So a lot of my colours have standard spots in my palette. Even though it looks messy, there's usually method to my chaos. I just have been playing with a few different colours lately, so that's why I just was not sure about that quinacridone. I'm pretty sure it's quinacridone gold though. And often in this area of white frothy water, it has an almost iridescent blue feeling to it sometimes when it's froth in the shade. So I've just picked up a little bit more Cobalt turquoise light. There's really nothing happening in the water here, but I might just put a few little marks. And once I put the rocks on, I can decide whether that works. I'll look at it from a distance. I think often we make decisions when we're too close to our paintings, too much on top of them, to actually know whether something works, and then we tend to overwork it a little bit. Over here we've got water. And there's like a lovely lead in up here. So I'm just going to put a little bit of shadow, a little bit of colour in that froth of water, the sepia, so that hopefully it looks like it's hit a rock, the water's hit a rock and bounced up. There's a little bit of shadow on this side of these rocks, again indicating that the water's come up, and the water's come through here, and I feel like in my photo the water's rushing back from there as a wave's coming in and it's hit. So I can now see that I need some colour, and it's that almost iridescent blue, so I'm just playing over here, maybe a little touch more Prussian blue in with Cobalt turquoise light. Let's see what this looks like. Nice, but needs more water, needs to be lighter. And I want to indicate as though there's water coming back through there. So my stroke is horizontal. And I'll just link that colour in to the mauve there. And I'm going to just soften some of this. So over here I didn't soften the strokes. Here I'm just wanting to indicate a little bit of movement and a little bit of colour in that water. So I've actually coming the other side of the stroke with clean water before it dries. If the colour's lost its sheen, then it's too late, unless you're happy with blossoms. a little bit of that. I've got some grey here. I flicked by accident a drop of the dark sepia stone colour, so I just softened it out before it dried. So I'll put a bit of blue into that. In the photo, these rocks all cover up the gaps, but they would have been just a little bit too big in my painting, so I'll add a little bit of paint there, even though I'm not sure what's there. And that's probably all I would do for the water at the moment, except this bit. So I've splattered masking fluid here where it's hitting the rock, but it wouldn't look like splashing water if I just leave it white. Like, it's got to have some shadow in that, in amongst that for the splatters to look like water. So I'm putting in a little bit of a first wash, and you can see I'm really scumbling it now. I'm not using this horizontal stroke. I'm just trying to get varied mark making that hopefully will indicate as though the water is under pressure. A little bit of rock peeping through here and there here. So this is just the sepia or the Jones grey I'm picking up, I think, just to bring a bit of rock down and break those lines. I'm not loving the white in there because I don't want to draw your eye back over here. So I'm going to put just a little touch of mauve. And so part of that is that this is the lightest light, wherever we've got white, next to our darkest darks. So that will draw your eye as if that's a center of interest or focus. So I'll just soften it. And when I look at the photo, I can see that is actually the case, that it's quite grey up in there. So that white froth is in the shade. So what I might do later is come back once I've taken the masking fluid off and actually put a shadow over that whole area. So I'm just building up in some places. I feel like this green is too green there. That was the Cobalt Turquoise light. I'm just going to pop a little bit of the more neutral mauve over that. Okay, and what I will show you up here, so this is still slightly damp. This was my tester of colours, so I would always come back and test what I think I'm going to do if it's not something I've done before, to know whether it will work. So I'm coming into pure French Ultra because I want to decide, okay, do I want to put some shadow on some areas of these rocks to set them back. So, you know, rock in the shadow, in the shade, can be a darker tone, or it can have a mauve tone to it, like a lovely coolness. So there's no purpose to me putting more dark brown because I'm going to end up with brown rocks, and I'm not a painter of brown. I love shadow where it has luminous life. So I'm looking now at this and deciding, where do I want to really set back and change. I want this piece to come forward. This is in front of that. So straight away I know this is where I will put some shadow. So I'm going to, just after doing that test, I'm going to put the tiniest touch of alizarin into it, so it's not just pure blue, because this is light. I can see on my photo as well, there's a lovely dark shadow in here. So I'm also looking at the rock shapes that I can see. I'm not just painting indiscriminately. I'm going to leave some sides, some what would be the fronts of the rock. So I'm seeing this as the front of that rock. I won't put shadow on it. Put shadow down here. This is a lovely rock that has as if it's got a front as well on it, facing forward. Maybe this whole section though could be shadowed. And this will soften in. At the moment it looks super bright, but trust me, it's going onto damaged paper. It won't remain that bright. And so now I'll also go along and just put, suggest some shadow sides. So suggest some 3D to my rocks, if that makes sense. You know, a rock has the side plane, the top plane. So one side here facing out, one side at the front, which is in shadow, and then it's got the top. So the front side is what I'm thinking is in shadow. I'm just going to angle it to have a little look from the front. Okay. And so I'm looking as well for shapes and going, okay, there was a lovely, as if it was the front of a rock, I'd created the side. I don't want to do this all over, but I just want to give some of them a little bit more suggestion of shape. This feels really blue just here because it went on such a light rock, but what I will do is just drop a little touch of sepia into it from the bottom. There we go, that looks better. Because it just blends a little bit more now with the rock. I really like that area. There's probably nothing, maybe here. I like some of these lines just naturally make it look as though you've already got that shape. And then this part up here again needs to be further away than this. So I don't want to overdo the blue, but I will just put some, this is a bit lighter now, I've just picked up a bit less, a bit more watery, so less pigment. So let's make that part of that closer rock. Oh, I was sad to do that because I loved that that lovely red piece there. But I feel like that sets that back just that little bit more. We want the focus to be down here. I'm going to just bring a little bit into this top one because it's up near the corner of my painting. And we want to bring the eye, we want to keep the viewer in. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry. I would normally keep painting, but it's late afternoon for me, and I've got a mandarin tree that the cockatoos have started eating my mandarins, so I'm going out to rescue it with some bird netting. But just before I do, I just thought what I might do, I've got a bit of sepia on my brush, and I might just put a few more of these little dancing marks. And I know it's really easy to go, oh my gosh, what's she doing? That's crazy. It's you know, she's not paying much attention. These will fade in because the paper's damaged. Everything we do on top softens as it dries. But I just want to bring this rock shelf a little bit more forward. So I'm not going to do this up here. I'm going to do it just on this. And because I can see a few there that I really like the look of happening, that's why I just wanted to make that stronger. And I'm looking at the shapes in some places where there's already dark against light. And I've got just a little buffet in my dining room. What I tend to do with the painting at this stage now, I want to look at what's happening here and with the rocks. I would take it in and just overnight be able to look at it from different angles as I pass. Just glance, see it in the dimmer light at night time, as well as with some good light, and that will tell me whether I need more work in the water, although it really won't tell me until I get these rocks on, but it just lets me try not to overwork it if I can look at it from a distance. Part 2 of this video will follow within a couple of days. See you soon.